Good. All right. So today we're talking about fear, which I don't know if there's a more relevant time or relevant topic right now. And I'm so thankful, Victoria, that you could take the time to join me today. We haven't met in person before, but we have a mutual friend on Facebook, and I recognize you as a moon sister, since I'm also love the moon and look to her for guidance and inspiration. So I just felt an instant connection with you. And you've been doing posts that are just so authentic and so reassuring and so rings so true right now that I'm honored to have you as my guest today.
The honor is definitely mine, Cricket. Thanks.
All right. So the topic of fear, I kind of want to know why it shows up. Since we live in a polarity planet, we need to have the fear along with the love and joy and happiness. So in my journey, I'm always looking for ways to take those things, look for the good in them, and how to kind of transmute them into good things. So I'm curious why it shows up, and I would love for you to share as well your 7 steps to flow that kind of align with that too.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. So it's interesting because this world of duality that we live in with this fear and love, and interestingly, when I first started coaching, I would talk about fear and love as the kind of inescapable reality of life, if you like. And in these days, I think the question everything philosophy is probably the only one to really stand by. It's like, what do we really know about fear except that it was a human evolution to get us out of danger, the fight or flight or freeze response. And funnily enough, the freeze response has become a much more modern response to fear. The paralysis, the depression, even the anxiety, the body takes it all on because you're not taking the action to run away or to fight. So I'm actually throwing everything up in the air personally for me in flow world. And I always say flow world is a microcosm in my sort of area of study, if you like, to the flow world at large. And maybe it's good to explain what I use the word flow for, because it's used in a few different yet similar ways. But the definition of flow as it pertains to my work is simply that it's the perpetually moving infinite intelligence of all life. And the intelligence behind life, maybe I should say. So the words, I don't know, universe and God and whatever else we use for that intelligence behind life, that's the miracle, that's the imperceptible, the mysterious, if you like. Those words don't express the movement and the cycles of life and the change that we go through. And the seasons are the most perfect reflection of that for us, at the world outside our window. Because we're not linear. And I think, I came out of the corporate world. I used to work in headhunting in the investment banking industry in the city in London, where everything was fueled by adrenaline for a start, the fear response to lack, the fear response to not being better than your competitor, the fear response to what do people think, the fear response to the future. And our insurance industry is the most compelling evidence of our fear response to the future. It's a multi-billion pound industry across the world that we are not prepared to risk anything. We want to mitigate the risk using the financial system. And in a way, that could be said to be another fear-based, man-made response to life, is having this capitalist society that's driven by money. And I've lost my thread now.
Well, I have a question now. So yeah, so we have polarities, but if we don't live on a line, which I don't think we do either, because we have a 3D world at the minimum, right? And then some people think we have 5D and 10D, and it goes on from there. So if it's not a line and it's multidimensional, then it's the circular is kind of how you see your flow, and that it and the seasons and the cycles. So how do we bring that back around then from
Yeah,
love to fear?
good question. Because how do we, as humans who have a finite existence, whereas nature continues forever, of course, around the cycles? And I think with humans, we are, because we are trying to force life into a linear sense of I get from here to here, and then of course the next fear response is, well, I've got here and it's not what I thought it was. Panic, you know. So we've got there, and then what? Instead of, because we're forcing life to be like that and not accepting it to be like that, we're not traveling through the spiral. And I think that is the closest analogy so far for the work that I do to where we are as humans in our finite existence on this earth, is to working along the spiral. And people will talk about raising levels of consciousness, vibration, obviously frequency. So we're all, you know, we go around, and arguably there could be a line up the middle. And it's interesting that the dollar sign is like the rigid sort of masculine with the kundalini feminine around it, and I find that really interesting. But the spiral, you know, goes around this line, and we are taking a trajectory which develops, and I don't know, because we're 3D, where is that line actually going? But we travel around, and we might meet the same lessons as we go around the spiral, but we still go through our own little life deaths on the way. And the 7 facets of flow that you mentioned earlier are a loving way of bringing our ego mind into relief from fear, if you like. So the 7 facets of flow are the unknown, being unclear, acceptance, trust, surrender, connection, or conscious connection, because we're always connected, but we have subconsciously separated ourselves. So our work, if it is such a thing, is to consciously connect. And the 7th is love. So by moving our energy into conscious connection, facet 6 of flow, and looking at these 7 facets of flow from the unknown through to love, you could say there's a little bit of a journey there, where the unknown is the seed in the belly of the woman, or the seed in the ground of the earth, and it moves into not being clear where it's going, and then it accepts that it's here, that it has a life, and then it trusts, and then it's complete surrender before it consciously connects out of the earth. And love is that sort of full bloom. And there is a flow underworld, that's kind of flow world. There's a flow underworld which is going through the shadow, and I haven't quite finished listening to your interview on the shadow, but I will, because that was really interesting. And this shadow work that's so important, because we still have duality, because we're still in fear place a lot of the time, we haven't transmuted that to love. But I think the thread of where I began this was to question everything, in that I'm starting to wonder whether really it is all love, and it's the ego perception of certain things which are fearful, and we are being given bigger and bigger opportunities, of which of course the current global pandemic is one major one, to bring the fear into the light and transmute it into love. And you were talking about that just now, and by using our intelligence, because we are intelligent beings, and that's got us into a lot of trouble, but let's use it for good, we can allow these concepts of trust and surrender and acceptance to bring us through those stages of fear, when we've forgotten to love and we've fallen into fear. And I suppose arguably, if we trusted, we wouldn't be scared. If we could surrender, we wouldn't fear. And there are countless amazing humans in history who I'm teaching my little 6-year-old girl about the great women of the world, like Anne Frank. You're in that part of the world right now, close by, who wrote her diary in Amsterdam in hiding from the Nazis, who wrote pieces like, I still believe in the inherent goodness of all people. You know, to be able to write that Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning in a concentration camp. Nelson Mandela on Robben Island, who did not come out, become president of South Africa and punish those who punished him. Mm-hmm. So there are massive examples of those in history who have been in deep shadow and been able to shed the light on that shadow. And we are all made of the same. We all have the same potential. And just because those humans have made historical impact and we remember them doesn't mean that those of us who are living in our so-called small households behind closed doors aren't having the same ripple effect out, in the cosmos.
Right. Though I had goosebumps when you were mentioning those people and those examples, because it's so powerful. And I also liked, and part of our shadow talk with Christine last week, we had a friend, Alma, that posted the comment that she liked to see it as it was seen unseen, the shadow and the self. And so I'm kind of getting that from like the beginning of this journey is the unknown, not necessarily fear. And I think that's a beautiful way for me to then see, okay, that's what I'm afraid of, right? It is the unknown that makes you angry, that makes you jealous, that makes you scared, because we just like to control everything. I know I like to see the future, and when I can't, that's when it usually comes out as anger, embarrassment, shame, guilt, anything that's related to fear. So that is an interesting parallel, how it's the unknown as like the step one.
Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of control that humans try to exert on an individual and collective measure, knowing the future, predicting the future, stock markets, the weather even,
Right.
It's just become so normalized that we can't control it. We need to know what it's going to be. And even astrology, just occurred to me now. I love following astrology, and it's so powerful at the moment to see, as above, so below, sort of thing. But it's still us needing to look at it for the clues about what's going to happen, and are we going to be okay? Because we are kind of survival programmed, I suppose, and for some reason we don't trust the cycles of life and death because we fear death, the death of ourselves, so much. And I wonder if we can lean into that sort of those miniature deaths of ego, death of knowing, death of control. If we can lean into those deaths, would we actually come to not fear our own physical death, or to less fear our own physical death? And we're being shown now, death in so many different ways. One, the way we see death literally, and the other being the death of the ways we have fought so hard to maintain. And really the energy of those is no different, but we must put meaning to it. And why not? We are programmed to make meaning of the madness or the illusion of our lives. And I suppose taking that to its extreme, when we talk about free will, that is potentially the biggest illusion of all. We need to believe in free will. Otherwise, what's the point of life? It's the cosmic joke. But free will then actually links back into control. And I'm putting all this under that bracket of question everything and be curious about everything, because maybe free will is part of the illusion, and we should enjoy that illusion and play with that concept. But again, arguably, question everything. Maybe all part of an energy that we will never understand, and divinely orchestrated, or whatever language you want to put down to it. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I just saw your post today about, was it today that you did the live about question everything?
No, I
Or
haven't
just
done
see
the
it
live.
today?
No,
Okay.
no, it's funny because I have three philosophies. I love playing with language. It's silly and it's a bit childish, but you know, it helps me bring out my inner child, which is always useful. The very first philosophy has always been, for the last 7 years, we are all in this together. The second one is question everything, and the third one is let go, let flow. And it just feels like now that that's kind of spilled over to one of my friends actually recently just drove past dropping off some groceries for me and the kids, and she said, I never got your stuff about flow, Vic. I get it now. Drove off again. And I was like, oh yeah, great, you know, because it's true. It's like we are all in this together, and although we're not all in the same boat, I think I've read somebody actually speak about this really eloquently. We are all in the same storm, and we're starting to feel together more than ever before. And you know, the community and the collaboration inherent in that, and the love inherent in that, I hope will start to bring out the shadow to be seen, and yeah, bring down the fear and up the love, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
That's the hope, isn't it? I
Mm-hmm.
suppose in these days.
Yeah, I love that analogy of not being in the same boat, but being in the same storm.
It wasn't mine actually. I
Yeah.
read.
If you can find it and link it to the chat afterwards, that would be great too. Um, yeah, I mean this and the question everything and I mean you're laughing a lot. I think it is kind of a joke, but we can have fun with it. Like you're supposed to have fun with the questioning, right? Like not so serious about it, because that's another way to kind of play with how we perceive what's going on. And that I believe like if we change our perception, that's the biggest part of changing the emotion around it. So is that?
Yes, I would agree. I think it was Marianne Williamson who said that a miracle is literally only a change in perception. You know, and we all talk about the miracle of a baby being born, but do we really see it as a miracle? And I think you can start to realize that your energy or frequency has shifted when you know you have moments of getting pure unadulterated joy out of watching, you know, a seed push out of the earth. You know, those because those are the miracles of life, but they are also the mundanity of life, because it's the everyday. And it's when those two supposedly opposites collapse into one, that I would argue, would start to see the lightness of life, and live it more easily. I think it's difficult. It's easy, you know, I'm not in the situation right now when I have a loved one in ITU on a ventilator. You know, I don't want to, I think we can have these conversations on the fringes of the front line, doctors and nurses, other key workers who are in the thick of it and who don't have this opportunity to question everything. They are just in fight mode, I guess, because it has its place. You know, there is a tiger in the room for them. So they are fighting the tiger, and they're doing it for us, for the collective. So it's having huge respect for every single fellow human being who is in their own thought generated and self-generated. I suppose we need to take responsibility for our own reactions to everything, fear response, if you like, but having the respect to know that there are going to be different experiences of this, and that it might well be easier for me to sit here talking to you and talk about death when I don't have somebody whose life is currently hanging in the balance. And my hope is that if we can go through a collective evolution, raise in frequency, when the next time each one of us comes faced with our own physical mortality and death of a loved one, we might bear it more easily and understand its place in the cycle of life more easily. That would be my hope.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And thank you for bringing them up. And every time I think about people that are in a hospital right now, both, you know, fighting for their lives and all of the caretakers that are working to save them, you know, again, there is a place for fear. And if that, gets you to put your scrubs on and go to work that day, to know that it's serving a purpose. When I look at your 7 facets of flow in this conversation, I want it to be like a choice when you want to get out of that fear, that this is a way to make it easier, not to label fear as something bad. That's not what I want the purpose of this conversation to be. And so thank you for bringing up that it does serve a purpose. It does have a place. Yeah, it's easier to talk about when you're not in not in that shadow or underground, fighting for your life. I know I'm a freeze person when I'm faced with it. That's my go-to. And of course, that's when it's the hardest to kind of put your head up and look around and see if there's even any options or another perspective that you could take, when that's happening, when you're in that moment. So I liked your practice of, doing it on small steps of looking at cycles and maybe tiny deaths. Our day or our relationships or our life or our, these cycles. Because once you make it a habit, then maybe there'll be a little spark inside of you that reminds you of it when you really need it.
We're flexing, I would say, with facet for trust. Flex our trust muscles. You might not want to test your ability to trust by suddenly jumping off a cliff, just to use a facetious example, but you might want to do it by just trusting another human in your life a little bit more, until you sort of flex your trust muscles, and you can see when the wisdom shows to flex it even further. And I think the world keeps moving and changing, regardless of whether we fight, flight, or fight, fly, or freeze. And sometimes that freeze response is simply a reactive response, because there's nothing important enough to take us out of it, if that makes sense. And I'll try and make a bit more sense by using an example from my own life, because at the moment I have a 4 and a 6-year-old. I'm a single mum, and it's just us in the house 24/7. And I found myself feeling huge grief for what's going on, and confusion and joy and all those emotions that everyone's feeling about, wow, these are the times, what's going on, and so not being able to process any of that and also continue with my flow work as much, I guess. And so I potentially would go into freeze, but I can't, because my kids are waking me up at 6 a.m. and they need feeding and clothing and entertaining. And so life for me is destined to be not in a freeze response, whereas it might have been if circumstances have been different. So it's almost like, allow it to be what it is, and then recognize what the important things are that will change what it is, if that makes sense. And I suppose you could argue that I'm going into sort of fight response, because I'm fighting to make sure that my kids still have a good experience of life, and I'm fighting to make sure that I do switch on in the mornings and do what I need to do for them. So it's never a clear cut. It's a collective thing, I suppose, and the collective thing could be the team in your house, or the street where you live, or the neighborhood, or the entire globe. And it's going to, your response to fear will change according to what is going on in your own little flow world at the time. And we do tend to label ourselves and identify with things like depression and anxiety. And I think that's dangerous to label ourselves at all, because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then we fear it, and we get into that state like, the fear response is in there because we think that there are no other opportunities. There's no alternative. That's who I am. I'm a manic depressive.
Right.
I'm a neurotic, and it's really important to kind of recognize those cycles of life and how we can evolve and change throughout our entire lives, right up to the point where we take our last breath.
Yeah, that's so true. I shouldn't label myself that way because you never know what circumstances will come up. And, you know, like in this, if you're in a growth mindset where you never stop learning and growing, otherwise you kind of finish the story. You tell yourself the ending of the story before you even get there.
Yeah.
Because we think once we're done school, we're done learning, or once we've hit puberty, or you know, whatever fake milestone we have in our life, we think, okay, that's the end. Now I am who I am with this title, with this role, with this, you know, kind of defined by the people in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if fear is the unknown, you know, it's funny, like stepping into the unknown is the first part of it, and also kind of the solution. Like it's the answer and the like leaning into that and being brave enough to go into that is the
yeah, for sure. And sometimes I sort of see this diagram in my head of like, you know, there's life here and we're trying to not engage with it, and we just need to start from not knowing where it's going, and we're sort of hovering here, we're numbing ourselves with Netflix and chocolate and drugs and alcohol and whatever else it is, but we just need to engage with it. And then, you know, and then potentially we have our eyes open here, and then we start, and then we go here and we shut them, and we allow our senses, our wisdom, our intuition to take over. And that's when the unknown starts to become a really magical thing, because we're learning to see in the dark, if you like.
wow.
And then we can just sort of navigate up like the lovely seedling does underneath the ground, and growing the roots. Actually, I'd forgotten about that bit. You know, I wonder what, you know, that really getting deeper in there to really nourish and allow ourselves that sort of depth up that will reflect the height we grow. You know, until we've grown those really deep roots, are we really going to be able to reach full bloom?
Right. It's not just seeing in the dark, it's literally growing in the dark and getting nourishment from the dark. Wow.
Yeah. And a tree, as I understand it, a tree is this equal and opposite underneath the ground. And that just, I've just got goosebumps to think, you know, and the enormity of what is going on underneath in the unknown, unseen, dark, wet, you know, it's just phenomenal. So, and we live kind of just above the surface. It's like, what's down here? And, you know, let's really nourish ourselves with the juice of our bodies and what we don't see. And of course, that energy of existence is manifested in body dysmorphia, not even being aware of who we are, what we look like, being ashamed of ourselves, shame buried deep. And yeah, I mean, this is all, I'm sure, what you discussed in the shadow, but going deeper is, it's like a diamond. You know, a diamond is made under immense pressure, very deep down in the earth. But look what a gem, and how much we prize that at the end of its creation. And maybe sometimes we can imagine ourselves as that sort of creation under deep discomfort and pressure under the earth, before we kind of, you know, shine as the gems that we all
yeah bring. And if you don't dig that deep, you'll never know that it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that's a beautiful ending to our talk, because we're at half an hour already, though I could I could keep talking about this, Victoria. It's so beautiful to hear your perspective on things, and I hope this offers maybe some comfort or some questioning or some thoughts to come up for whoever watches this.
Yeah, likewise. And love to everybody, and love to you.
Yeah.
Thanks for doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. I'll link to your site on this post as well if people want to find you when you do moon readings and some other inspirational Facebook Lives.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.